The God Eater franchise has been around for 9 years. In that time, it's had 3 console games, 2 mobile games, and an anime created for it. Now, with its 9th anniversary, comes the release of God Eater 3. This is the first time that the original version of the game is releasing outside of Japan, and the first time the game will get updates via patches instead of by re-releasing the games. As someone who has been a fan of this franchise for 6 years, I'd like to give my thoughts on the most recent entry of the franchise. This means there are a few things to take into account with this review. There will likely be things that I regard highly and things that I criticize because I'm a fan of the franchise. I will make some comparisons between God Eater 1, 2, and 3, and the final score I give this game will definitely have a little bias in it, so keep that in mind. God Eater 3 takes place in Europe at some point after the year 2080. This is different from the previous 2 entries which have taken place in Japan. The general plot for this game is very similar to the past 2 games. The story starts with your character becoming a God Eater, and then you're rapidly introduced to most of the primary cast in the game. A lot of your teammates are similar to characters in the past. Zeke is a carefree guy, Hugo's essentially the leader, and there's usually at least one character to show off breast physics. The overall story isn't bad, it's just nothing really jumps out. It pretty much stays in the comfort zone of God Eater. There are a lot of predictable events, and some characters are predictably evil, especially if you've played the previous game. I've seen some opinions on the God Eater subreddit that have positive emotional responses to the story, but on a personal level, I didn't really have any very strong feelings for it. That doesn't make the story bad, but in comparison to other games, it's pretty average. A lot of plot points kind of happen out of convenience, or just to introduce new mechanics. As an example, spoiler alert, Acceleration Trigger is an ability introduced relatively early in the game, and it's a device that's found to take the God Eater's life force and use it to enhance their combat abilities. But then, one of the characters in the cast just finds out a way to make it work, and now you have a new mechanic. This is never really addressed again. It's not a huge deal, but it can feel a little pointless to introduce these things that seem like they'd have huge drawbacks to use and are dangerous, and then just shove them aside. Thankfully, the story in God Eater games has usually been average, so it's not like having an average story is really any different from the past games. The most important part of God Eater is the gameplay. Unlike the Monster Hunter series, God Eater focuses on fast-paced action. God Eater 3 takes the gameplay of the first 2 games and refines it. It takes a lot of old mechanics and changes them around in order to nerf overpowered ones and buff weaker ones. Something special about God Eater is the burst state. Burst is divided into 3 levels, and each level strengthens your character's DPS and gives them special skills to use with their attacks. Blood arts from the second game make a return as burst arts. Instead of just 1, you are now given 3, but they can only be used in burst. Every weapon has at least 3 burst arts per category, these categories being ground, air, and step, and each art can bring something new to the table. On top of this, burst activates skills on your weapons and on your burst control unit. Each level of burst strengthens these skills. God Eater 3 takes burst from being a simple DPS enhancer that can mostly be ignored to being a core mechanic of the game. Shielding has been nerfed a lot from previous titles. There is a noticeable difference in deploy time and guard area for each shield. This is a step in the right direction because in the previous games, most of the shields felt pointless outside of the tower shield since it reduces stamina rather than HP when you guard an attack. With a less forgiving guard area, it makes blocking a bit more difficult and you feel less invincible than in previous games. There are also a lot of different weapons in the game. You're given both close range and long range weapons. You can swap between the 2 freely in combat. There are 8 different close-range weapons and 4 different long-range. Most combat will focus on being up close and personal with your opponent rather than fighting from long distance. Every weapon feels different, so it's a lot of fun to find the one that you like. Sometimes you wind up becoming a jack of all trades, while other times you'll just learn 1 or 2 different weapons. The addition of assault missions is nice. In these, 8 players tackle 1 boss at the same time. The missions are only 5 minutes long, and it sounds like a daunting task, and sometimes it is. These missions are the only way to earn the new Engage effects, which are links that you can activate mid-battle for timed bonus skills. If you can't get 8 players, don't worry. A few AI-controlled characters with random engages will join you instead. Unlike the previous game, the AI at least functions properly. Outside of combat, there's the hub world, and it's simple enough to navigate. One issue I do have with the game, however, is that there's no simple way to search up a mission where a material is located. Of course, it is easy enough to memorize which enemies carry which type of material, and the drops are color-coded by difficulty, but it'd still be a nice feature to have, instead of having to go to the mission, select, and keep looking for the material you want. Overall, the gameplay is good. It feels fast, fluid, and flashy, and it goes out of the way to make burst more important instead of it making it a side mechanic, and that really gives a game a fresh feeling. God Eater 3 is a decent looking game. It's not going to break any boundaries graphically, but the game looks good enough. There's enough visual clarity to everything, and almost all the visuals are consistent. The music in the game is decent. Most tracks are what you'd expect from the franchise at this point. The English dub in the game is also decent. There weren't too many issues, aside from one or two cutscenes where the voices didn't match up with the characters' current movements or actions, but there are issues with lip syncing. A lot of the characters' mouths just don't really move or just look awkward when they're talking. There's one cutscene where a character's mouth doesn't move when he's speaking, so it's a little weird.
What did you say? You ages are nothing but cockroaches. Die here together.
You also have the option to change between both the English and Japanese voices, so if you don't like one, you can swap out to the other. On a personal level, I found that the English voices were perfectly fine for this game, but if you prefer the Japanese, that's fine too. For anyone planning to buy this game on the PC port runs the game well. There have been a few posts on the God Eater subreddit mentioning some graphical issues in the game. I personally have never run into these, but you might want to check them out. The first time the game started up, I had to switch the game manually to run on my NVIDIA card and not on my Intel integrated one, but after that, it was perfectly fine. Overall, God Eater 3 is a pretty good game. As someone who loves the franchise and wants to see more people adopt it as time goes on, this game is a great place to start. As a fan of the series, I'd give the game a 4 out of 5. While the game really is just decent, the gameplay does shine. I've completed every mission in the game so far, at a total of 60 hours of gameplay, with more updates coming in the future. I'm excited to see what's next for the series.